Oscar had one of the best races that I think anyone on that paddock or that grid would be proud of. He controlled that race beautifully, soaked up the pressure and solidified the fact that he is no way a number 2. But that said, it seems like McLaren is at the start of experiencing a Hamilton-Nico problem. Leclerc, on the other hand, would be reveling at the fact that, you know what, it was my win, but it was relatively stolen away from me, and I want to get back on that top step. In the Red Bull garage, I'm pretty sure Max is thinking, do you know what, I gotta make a statement again. I can't let Sergio out-qualify me. But would Sergio bring his street mastery back and out-qualify and outclass Max, and this time potentially even get on the podium? It's not even been a week, it's back-to-back races. This time we're talking about Singapore. Let's chat about the predictions and the rumors in the paddock. Welcome, you beautiful people. My name is Lucky. You guys know why you're here. We're here to talk about the sport that you and I love. Let's get stuck in. I think the fastest car and the money that you should put on potentially for this weekend is going to be either Leclerc in a Ferrari or Oscar in a McLaren. I think eras of Mercedes from 2014 and then the last year or the couple of years of dominance with Red Bull, they haven't necessarily been the best car at Singapore. So there might be this odd occasion that McLaren, which is the current dominant car, might not end up performing that well. But that said, my money is definitely either on McLaren or Ferrari. Yes, I know I can't gamble on both, but if you really had to choose, I'd go with the Ferrari in Leclerc's hands, right? So that leaves Red Bull and Mercedes as the third and the fourth fastest car. And for the fifth fastest car, I think Williams and Aston Martin will start fighting for those last 2 to 3 points consistently. We'll get into the upgrades very shortly because Williams do have a package coming in as well. And the rest of the folks, Haas, Alpine and RB would be fighting for the bottom half of the midfield. And then Sauber, long way out. I don't think they're going to turn around this season, at least not yet. Right, so that brings up to upgrades and see whether these teams are going to continue to maintain their pecking order. McLaren are expected to roll out a substantial upgrade. They did have an upgrade package, but they were holding it back almost to the point that, oh no, if we were to introduce this, we might unsettle the dominance of that car. But over the course of the last 2 races that they've seen that Ferrari had really caught up, and Ferrari is genuinely, I think in Baku, Ferrari was genuinely the faster car, but McLaren found a way to keep them behind even in the DRS track. And there's a lot of rumors about a cheeky little invention that McLaren had introduced a mini DRS. We'll get to that later in the video. They've come to the point that they need to try out this upgrade so that they can maintain that trajectory out, because McLaren are also under threat in the Constructors' Championship from Ferrari, but at the same time, even from a Drivers' Championship, Leclerc's about 19 points away from Lando, right? So that could change hands in one race if Lando has a DNF and Charles wins the race, which potentially could be Singapore. Red Bull also continuing to introduce some changes. They did make some changes to the floor edge and the underbody. Not a lot of those things are visible, but the F1 TV also did a nice analysis and a interview with Paul Monahan. And ultimately, I think they're trying to figure out what's happened to this car. And there was a tweet that went around saying that Red Bull had introduced a change in 2023 Barcelona that ultimately led them to these kind of challenges and correlation and unsettlement of the car. But they had such a dominant car, and Max drove that car with its challenges. That's how far they've gone back to identify these issues. But ultimately, they are going to introduce some some updates to maintaining their flowage and try and broaden that setup window, which seems to be the biggest problem at this point in time. And then last but not least, Williams, they're also bringing some upgrades, and if their trajectory and they seem to be finding correlation and working well, and if they continue to do that, that's why I think they will be consistently fighting for points with Aston Martin and solidifying and trying to solidify themselves as the 5th fastest car. That'd be a wonderful turnaround for Williams as well, right? So those are the upgrades that I'm aware of at this point in time. If there's anything more, I'll leave a YouTube short or an update on the community post. So let's have a quick look at the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship. Constructors is definitely going to be a 3-way fight. Red Bull fell to 2nd place. McLaren became Constructors leaders since, I think, 2014. But they have a 20-point lead. Ferrari, number 3, 51 points away from McLaren, but only 31 points away from Red Bull. So the top 3 are very much going to be McLaren, Red Bull, or Ferrari. In what order, I think still TBC. Ferrari could definitely challenge, but if Red Bull continues this trajectory, they'll definitely lose out on the 2nd spot as well. Mercedes, well settled, I think, in 4th, and there's a massive gap to Aston and so forth. I do expect Williams to continue to fight, and potentially in a really, really optimistic year, they might end up 6th, a place above last year as well, right? So that'd be awesome. I am a big Williams fan as well. So let's see. So that's where the Constructors are. And in the Drivers' Championship, I think things are heating up. And Charles has creeped into the conversation of the Drivers' Championship as well, right? So we are 7 races away. Lando is 59 points away from the championship leader, Max. Charles is 78 points away. They both have a potential shot at the championship. Yes, it would be a mammoth turnaround and it would be very well recognized, and both would be deserved champions if they were to overhaul that gap. But 7 races away, and if Max continues to have races like the last 2 where he finishes 5th, 6th or 7th, that overhaul for both Max for both Lando and Charles is absolutely possible. So another potential 3-way fight for the Drivers' Championship of 2024. Now let's get into the Singapore circuit. It is a wonderful race to watch. It's under lights, and it always brings wonderful qualifying sessions, and potentially this time around the race might be quite exciting as well. It is a street circuit with slow corners, and this time 4 DRS zones. One change introduced since the last season. There's a 4th DRS zone. It's inherently known for a quali track, i.e. you qualify well and the track is very difficult to overtake. But with the introduction of the 4th DRS zone this year, there might be a potential for us to actually see a decent amount of DRS play, because there's 4 zones and potential opportunities for overtakes. So I expect a really good race as well.
Weather-wise, I think it's going to be interesting. Saturday and Sunday, we're definitely going to look at a chance of rain. That might really mix up the grid. But one of the biggest problems that we're going to have is the ability to maintain cooling.
What happened last year, just to do a little recap, right? So it was a Carlos Sainz win, which was the only non-Red Bull win for that whole season, with wonderful antics to give Lando the DRS so that he could keep the fast charging Mercedes, which were on an alternative strategy, right? So Sainz won, Lando was 2nd, and then Russell had the podium sewn up until the last lap and he crashed, and Hamilton inherited 3rd place. Well, not inherited, but he was 3rd on the podium. Red Bull was relatively nowhere, so I don't know whether those problems will be inherent this year as well. But That was what happened last year. Let's get into the predictions for this year. In terms of quali, I think Ferrari in the hands of Leclerc, as I mentioned before, is going to be mighty. And he's going to come in with some passion and aggression to do somewhat of the wrongs right compared to Baku. Oscar will ride that wave. He's got more confidence. He's becoming comfortable. His quali pace is becoming even more prominent over the course of the last few races. So I think Oscar's going to qualify number 2, and Sergio is going to find a way to bring that car again to the top 3. In terms of podium, this time I'm not going to switch. I'm going to go with Leclerc win and Oscar second and Sergio third. Yes, it's a copy and paste of quali, but that doesn't mean that the race wouldn't be exciting. Those are my predictions. Now, let's get into the juicy stuff in the paddock. First, Pirelli and tyres. There seems to be a sentiment that, especially from Russell post that race in Baku, he said, first stint, we were nowhere. We weren't top 10 contenders. Last 50% of the race, we were definitely the fastest car. No one knows what's happening with the tyres, right? But is that a true statement? And he also mentioned that even Pirelli doesn't know what's happening with the tyres. James Allison also alluded to this on one of the debriefs, that tyres are one of the most challenging things to understand. Adrian on the High Performance podcast also mentioned that tyres are a very, very big thing, and it shouldn't be underestimated in terms of how performant getting the tyres into the right window. Lewis consistently complained. Max was complaining about the tyres, right? So is it the Pirelli fault that they don't build the tyres properly, or is it the constructor's fault? I think it's biased towards the constructor, right? Ultimately, you would want to build a car that works across multiple compounds. McLaren clearly have done that. Where they do a proper run plan over the course of FP1, FP2 and FP3, they find a setup window that is wide enough that works across different compounds. Ferrari similar. Yes, in Baku, one of the main reasons that they probably didn't understand and set up the car appropriately is because they missed out on FP1 with hard tyre running. So I don't think the right thing there is to point fingers at Pirelli. It's more about trying to figure out how you can widen the setup window of the car so that tire temperatures and managing tires doesn't become a problem. Number 2, K-Mag back in the F1 seat. So Ollie drove a wonderful race. Lewis mentioned it. The rookies are doing a great job. He's one of the rookies to have scored points on debut for 2 constructors in the same season. He's definitely earned a seat for next year. But the bigger question was, does it make sense to swap out Ollie and, get him on the Haas seat already? I think it's doubtful, because I think AO has some form of loyalty, because he already mentioned that if we could work with K-Mag in a different capacity, we'll continue to. There's also contracts. So I doubt that K-Mag would be replaced over the course of the season. But rationally, would you want to do it? Why not? Give Ollie even more time and a better chance to get him more experience and get the best out of the car in 2025, because the Haas does seem to be relatively around that top midfield so far with AO's leadership. Number 3, Colapinto to Sauber. 2 races in, the kid's got charisma. He's shown that he's relatively got speed in 2 street circuits, which ultimately means that it is high risk and high reward and razor thin margins. He's done well. James Wells have mentioned that it would be definitely something of interest to ensure that Colapinto finds another seat for 2025. That ultimately means you really only have 1 seat, right? I also mentioned this before. If Bottas is not going to find a seat in this grid, that would be quite sad. But someone like Colapinto coming into the grid, I gotta say, like, the kid's awesome. Like he's got amazing charisma. He's got lovely personality. So I think he deserves a place on the grid as well. And I think this is why they need to have another team on the grid, where like Andretti. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. So Colapinto already, after 2 races, outscoring Logan Sargent and already in contention for a 2025 drive. Right place, right time, and a little bit of luck with the right talent. Next, Max to Mercedes seems to have resurfaced. The tone of Max's responses, both in the car and post-race, almost seems like defeatist. He seems to have accepted the fact that Red Bull isn't that dominant of a car and there's no quick turnaround, which is the demeanor I kind of sense from his responses post-race and even during race, right? So it seems like Max has accepted the fact that all he can do is maximize the points, but not necessarily look at the top step of the podium anytime soon. We will see after Austin when they're expected to bring another change as well, or also the changes that they expect to bring in Singapore as well. But that said, there were comments about Helmut saying that Jos is a better friend with Toto than Christian, and that potentially a 2026 deal might be agreed. If you guys are curious where that leaves Russell, I've done a separate video. I'll link it somewhere here, because that means that there's 3 seats, leaving Antonelli, Russell, and Max as potential contenders for those 2 seats, right? But that's an interesting mix. But I think the only other consideration there would be Aston Martin. They've built an amazing set of facilities. They've built an amazing technical team, along with Adrian Newey now, and potentially Honda might have a banger of an engine as well. But if you had to put my money on a engine formula and a set of regulations, you'd probably go with Mercedes. So Max to Mercedes back on card is the rumor. Last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about Lando as well. So this is where I don't judge, but I'm just sharing my opinion, and I'm curious what you guys think as well, right? Leave a comment down. When Lando saw a double yellow, should he have just gone through it and accepted the consequences afterwards? Or did he do the right thing? Or is that not the right question to ask? And the right question to ask is, why did McLaren bring the drivers in 5 minutes to go when it was Q1 and they had no need to risk it? It can't be for like adding fuel or a flap adjust or something of the sort, right? So the team have to up their game and become better constructors, champion contenders, and give the drivers equivalent chances so that these things become non-questionable, right? Like, so I feel like it's more on the McLaren side, and it's not about questioning whether Lando should go through yellows, because ultimately it's a question of safety. But you don't know why the yellows are waved, and you can't judge the marshal for doing it, because would you rather be safe than sorry? I would naturally think that's what the sport needs. And Andrea Stella coming around and saying, oh no, it should have been a white flag, that I think is incorrect. It's a moment's judgment, and the judgment was right. The alternative is the team should have forecasted these challenges, especially in a street track, and then covered for it. That's my 2 cents. Last but not least, Piastri. Does McLaren have a Nico Hamilton 2.0 problem? For that, stick around for a couple of more days. New video coming out. That's all for this video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Ciao.